Okay, we have a change up today. It's a little too hot to be in the sanctuary, so I'm going to practice here. So it's not going to be as pretty behind me, but I hope you're all doing well, friends. And we're going to go finish Samson. So Judges 23, 16, 23 to 31. So I want to ask you first, do you like horror films? What's your favorite horror film? You can take a second to think about that. My favorite horror films is October's not too far away, but I love the Halloween movies. I loved watching the first one. I think it was Jamie Lee Curtis, and just like the Halloween movies, and they were. You could laugh about them a little bit because it's like the same thing happened again. Some horror films, back in the day, it was like the blood didn't even look real, and some of them were made so bad you could just laugh at them. But today, it's the horror movies. A lot of them are about spirits. A lot of them are extremely grotesque, and it's hard to stomach them. It's hard to get through them because they're so grotesque, they're so graphic. This Samson Bible stories, the Bible can be tough to read at times, and you'll wrestle with it. Samson's eyes were gouged out. This is what had happened, as I talked about last week, as this is what would happen to humiliate and to torment. And this was a big enemy. Samson was the nemesis of the Philistines because they couldn't beat him, even though the Philistines had control over Israel, or the power over Israel. But they could not beat him, and now they got him. Delilah set him up. As we talked about, the disobedience is why the strength came out, and here his eyes are gouged out. Extremely grotesque, like a horror film. They're humiliating him. He's in the temple of, they believe, possibly the god Dagon. And they are giving all the credit to God of Dagon. And look what our God, and Dagon is a grain god, a god of grain, and he was in the cells working with grain. And they bring him out to entertain. He becomes this freak circus act. Think about it, his eyes were gouged out, how painful that was. Then they're mocking him. There's so many people that are enjoying this circus freak act that there's thousands of people on the rooftops watching in the temple, and the temple's filled. So he's out there and they're like, entertain us, Samson. Look what our God has done. They brought our nemesis, the man that we couldn't beat. And here, Samson has to be entertained. They probably make him dance or throw things at him, mock him, all kinds of different things. And he asks the servant to put him by the pillars. By the pillars where the base is, where he knows that if he has strength, he can totally knock out the temple. And again, they are giving credit not to the God of Israel, as the God of Israel, as we know in the last week, that the strength was taken out of Samson because he disobeyed, not because of his hair was cut, because he disobeyed the three things a Nazarite does. You can't drink, you cannot cut your hair, and the third thing is that you cannot touch corpses. So, the strength was taken out of him. And here you go, Samson. And they're giving credit not to the God of Israel, but the God of Dagon. That's a major problem. And Samson pleads when he's against the two pillars, God, give me strength. Let me take out the Philistines. Give me strength. One more time. As the servant puts him by the base, so he'll knock out the temple if he can get these two pillars to knock him over. He's blind, but he can feel what he needs to knock over. Give me the strength. God gives him the strength. And Samson says, I want to take vengeance on them for gouging my eyes out. But this is a priest of Israel. This is the judge of Israel. So he wants vengeance for himself. And God gives him the power and knocks it over. More people died, as the text says, in this text, and from this temple collapsing in, than any time during 20 years of Samson's reign as a judge, as he was their nemesis. They could not defeat him because of his strength. And he gets a proper burial. But here's the thing. Samson wasn't given strength. God wasn't given strength to Samson for vengeance on himself, for gouging his eyeballs out. God is a jealous God, and I will come back to this. God is a jealous God, and he did not like the fact that the Philistines were giving credit to Dagon, their God, because Dagon didn't do nothing. Dagon's some kind of made-up God. But God took strength out of Samson. That's why he was able to be captured. And they weren't recognizing that the God of Israel did this, but they were giving credit, the Philistines, to the God of Dagon and not to the God of Israel. And that's a big no-no. You've got to give credit where credit is due, to the true and one and only God. So they made that big mistake, but let me take a step back. Take a step back to Samson. He was enduring all kinds of pain, that torture scene. Again, we talked about horror films. This is grotesque. God gave him strength to endure, not physical strength to knock over. I don't want to talk about that, where he physically strength knocked over to kill all the Philistines. God did that to get his own vengeance on for them believing that they were praising the wrong God. Not for Samson's own thought. But Samson's strength and endurance to go through all that he went through, the humiliation of him having to dance, to be mocked, God got him through. Some of the strongest people I've met in the world. And you think of people of faith that know the true God, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, the God that had a son that became the Messiah. The strength of what they can endure is absolutely amazing. As Vince Lombardi said, the famous football coach for the Green Bay Packers, said, it's not how hard, it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up. It's the perseverance. Some of the strongest people aren't the weightlifters that you saw in the Olympics, or the boxers, or the wrestlers, or how fast they could take people out. The strongest people are the ones with faith that have endurance. God gives them that strength. God gives you that strength to endure whatever physical ailment you have, whatever problems you're having, to endure things and trials and tribulations that you're going to go through in life that will flat out knock you down. But it's not, as Vince Lombardi said, how many times you get knocked down, but how many times you get up. And the strongest people of faith, that's what faith will do to you. But people want to give, and here's the problem. Our God is a jealous God. People want to give that strength, all they accomplish, all the finances, all their clothing. That is all from God. They want to give it. Where do they want to give it to? Anywhere but God sometimes. That's idolatry. In churches, we sometimes get in the idolatry of making an idol out of the Bible, making an idol out of somebody else, making an idol out of someone's ministry, making an idol out of some famous person, some politician. Idolatry. God is a jealous God. If you get anything from this sermon, all the glory goes to God. You cannot be caught into idolatry, giving credit to yourself, but all the credit has to go to God. This story is, I'll give you another example of the true God, of how powerful God is and the strength that he gave. He gave strength to Samson, not the physical strength, but the strength to endure. And we'll talk more about this next week with the New Testament. But the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel, the endurance that he had. He went up there and they were killing prophets. Ahab, his wife, Queen Jezebel. Ahab was the king of Israel. And she was killing the prophets of Israel. And Elijah was one of the top prophets of Israel. And he said, we will prove who the real God is. Because they were giving credit, just like this text, giving credit to the god of Baal, the fertility god, because Jezebel was killing the prophets of the true God, God of Israel. And Elijah goes up there to prove them wrong, and knows that God will prevail. And he has two burnt offerings from the prophets of Baal and the prophet of Israel, Elijah. It says the real God will come out and burn these offerings. They have two different offerings. And he is mocking them. Elijah is mocking them when Baal, the offering doesn't go up. And then, when it's the time for the God of Israel's offering catches fire, and Elijah proves who the real God is. God showed up, gave him strength, and there's where the endurance is. God always has endurance for his people. Gives you strength to get through trials and tribulations. And all kinds of things that are going to knock you down, give you the perseverance to get back up. Elijah had to go and run because Jezebel wanted to kill him. Hundreds of people were after Elijah, and he went and ran. God sent him an angel, fed him, and got him back on his feet. Had to come to him in a cave and tell him, Elijah, what are you doing here? But he got him back on his track, got him back doing the job that he needed to do to complete, to glorify God, to make the next king of Israel, and to make Elijah the next prophet. The same with Samson. He gave him. He didn't forget about him. Despite his 3 disobediences, he helped him endure through that pain and that grotesque and humiliation of the circus act. And they gave him the strength to push it over. It was God's strength to take out the Philistines. To endure that pain. You're going to have to endure pain, not only physically, mentally, and spiritually, because Satan will be like a hound on your back. So all the glory goes to God. Again, here's the thing. Samson, God was the judge of Israel. God of Israel, the true God. And they're giving credit to David. They were given, Jezebel was given, she's the queen of Israel, given credit to the God, the fertility God of all the things that were going on. And killing the true God's prophets. Elijah proves them wrong. So we have to give glory to the one and only true God, the one that gave a son that is the Messiah. Not to some spirit, not to some thing, not to some other God with a lowercase g, but to the one and only God, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham. All the glory goes to God. I had a pastor, my best mentor, one of my best mentors. You could not talk to her on Wednesday because she was going over her sermon. She took her preaching serious, and I used to tell her all the time, she knocked things out of the ballpark every week because she took that day and she prepared. And when she came, she knew God was with her and gave her the strength to endure, to preach to audiences. Some of them didn't want to hear her. She was a woman. They weren't happy with a woman at first. And Christmas Eve, and I would tell her how powerful her sermons were. And she always would say one thing to me, and I'll tell you what she would say to me. But I would say to her, your sermons just touched me so much. And I knew how hard she worked on them. Christmas Eve, one of her most hostile people, because he didn't want a woman in the church as the pastor, I heard him say to somebody else, I have never heard a sermon like that in this church on Christmas Eve. And I've been coming to this church for well over 20 years. I have never heard a sermon like that, as powerful as that. And he changed. I talked to her because we were colleagues. I was the youth leader, and I told her about it. She said, every time I would mention her and would say, your sermons were great, and especially this time, to God be the glory. Every time. Your sermon was great, Pastor. To God be the glory. She would smile at me. Every time she smiled, this radiant smile. You could see God coming out of her. The strength and the power to have her go through what you need to go through. Go through the go-through. Because people will try to hold you back. Again, not how many times, as Vince Lombardi said, you get knocked down, but how many times you get back up. God will give you the strength and the endurance. And the second thing is you cannot give anything, any glory, but to God. Not many people watch the Olympics. I feel like I was the only one watching the Olympics because when I ask people about the Olympics and the races and the things like that, I love the track. I watch some of the gymnastics and I watch some of the swimming. It's so exciting, especially the track and swimming and thing. But the track athlete that caught my attention was Sydney McLaughlin. We had several New Jersey track athletes and several New Jersey Olympians. Most notably Carly Lloyd of the soccer team. But Sydney McLaughlin, she says this after she won the 400-meter hurdles and won the gold. And then she would go on and win another gold on a relay. After she won, not only did she win the gold medal, she broke the world record. And she says, records are made to be broken, and this will be broken. But they couldn't turn the cameras off quick enough. You see, the secular world wants to turn the cameras off, but she got this out. She said, all the glory, records are to be broken, but all the glory goes to God. They couldn't turn the cameras off quick enough. They didn't have a delay. They didn't even get them off. That 7-second delay, or whatever the delay is. All the glory goes to God. They might have tried, and even the writers heard it, and they wrote it up. You can't be giving glory to Dagon. You can't be giving glory to Baal. You can't be giving glory to some spirit, some flashlight, some wick thing. You can't be giving it to that. You have to give it to God, the God of Israel, who sent his son, the Messiah, the one and only Messiah, who saved our souls. So we have everlasting life and forgiveness of sins. That's where the glory is. The glory goes to God just as Sydney McLaughlin, the world record breaker, said, all the glory goes to God. The last thing I say is, you're going to go through some things. My 2 points are here. Usually Baptists have 3 points. I only have 2 points. That's good enough. Strength. Endure. Strongest people are not weightlifters, people that can take people out in a few seconds. It's the people that go through endurance through life, because life is a marathon. We'll talk more about this next week in the New Testament. The strength God will get you to. God of Israel, not the God of Dagon. This is why God was jealous and put vengeance. Not because of Samson's eyes, but because they were giving credit to their God and not the God that took the strength out of Samson. All the credit goes to the God of Israel. He will get you to the strength to get where you need to be. Through all you go through. So I end with this. The glory goes to God. As my mentor would say every time with her sermon, to God be the glory. To God be the glory. And she'd smile at me. And I say to you, to God be the glory. And I say to you this, the glory must go to The glory must go to, 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 the glory must go to God. Amen. I love you all.